I thought loyalty to family meant safety, until the night I learned it could destroy me. When my mother said, "Your brother needs it more," she left him everything: the house, the savings, even the future I thought was mine. I smiled through the pain, but inside I shattered. A month later, her text arrived. "The mortgage is late." That was when I understood. I was never the daughter, only the backup plan. They thought I'd stay silent, that I'd keep carrying their burden. But betrayal has a strange power. It can break you, or it can make you unstoppable. I used to believe that being the good daughter meant giving until there was nothing left to give. My life had been a string of sacrifices. Late-night calls, sudden bills, rushed visits when my mother or brother needed something. It was never a question of whether I would show up, but how quickly. And each time, when I felt the weight pressing against my chest, I convinced myself this was what family was supposed to be. I remember one night vividly. It was 2 a.m, my phone buzzing on the nightstand. I answered groggily, and there was my mother's trembling voice. "Your brother's in trouble again. He needs you." That sentence, always delivered with an air of unshakable authority, had become her weapon of choice. "He needs you more." The phrase was a command dressed as love, a chain disguised as duty. And every time she said it, I swallowed my resentment and gave in. When I paid his overdue rent, my mother thanked me with a perfunctory sigh, like I had merely done the inevitable. When I drove 3 hours to pick him up after another reckless mistake, she called me a blessing. Yet beneath the words, I always heard the same message: he matters more. Somewhere deep down, I knew I was running on fumes, but I whispered to myself, if I just keep pushing a little longer, everything will be fine. It was a fragile hope, but it was all I had left. The truth, though, was less forgiving. The signs were always there. My mother's social media posts, vague and passive-aggressive, written as though she were auditioning for sympathy. Some children forget where they came from. The messages stung, though she never named me. My brother would send group photos in the family chat, photos from birthdays, dinners, gatherings I hadn't even known about. I stared at the smiling faces and asked myself if I was truly part of them, or just a shadow they tolerated when convenient. And then came the first crack I couldn't ignore. A medical bill in my name, tucked into the wrong envelope, slipped into my mailbox. Thousands of dollars for treatments I never received. My stomach twisted as I read through the details, hands shaking, certain there must be some mistake. When I confronted my mother gently, she brushed it off with casual dismissal. "Don't worry, sweetheart. It's all taken care of. You don't need to think about it." Her words floated over me, like a blanket meant to soothe, but the blanket was suffocating. Something wasn't right, and for the first time I couldn't shake the thought. Still, I did what I always did. I convinced myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe Mom had it handled. Maybe I was overreacting. Because the alternative, that she had used my name, my identity, without even telling me, was a truth I wasn't ready to face. That night, lying in bed, I pulled my dog into my arms. He was the only creature who asked for nothing in return, the only one whose loyalty was unquestioned. As he nestled against me, breathing slow and steady, I let my tears fall into his fur. The house was silent, but inside me, something screamed. I wanted to believe love could be simple, that family could be safe. Yet even as I clung to that moment of warmth, a voice whispered in my head, they are building a world without you, and you are helping them do it. Still, I kept moving forward, refusing to let myself drown in suspicion. My mother's words, the rituals of duty, the constant reminder that my brother needed more than I did, they became the walls of my prison. I stayed inside willingly because stepping out meant admitting that everything I believed about family might be a lie. But cracks have a way of spreading. The bill, the posts, the gatherings, they were only the beginning. The story I thought I was living was already unraveling, thread by thread. And though I didn't know it then, the unraveling would lead me to a truth far crueler than I could imagine. For now, I clung to the hope that my sacrifices had meaning, that my family would one day see me, truly see me. I told myself, as I always did, if I just hold on a little longer, things will be okay. I didn't know then that the worst was yet to come. The lawyer's office smelled of old wood and stale air, the kind of place where secrets were kept and lives quietly rearranged. I sat on the stiff leather chair, my hands locked together in my lap, trying to slow the pounding in my chest. My brother lounged across the table, already smirking, as if he knew something I didn't. My mother sat upright, her lips pressed into a thin smile, the picture of composure. The lawyer adjusted his glasses and began to read. The words flowed like water, legal jargon that blurred in my ears until the moment my name, or rather the absence of it, pierced the fog. The house, the savings, every last piece of what my parents had built was left to my brother. My name was nowhere on the page, as though I had never been born. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The room shrank, the air grew thin, and my vision tunneled. My mother looked at me then, not with shame or hesitation, but with a quiet firmness that cut deeper than the words themselves. "Your brother needs it more," she said softly, almost gently, as if explaining a decision too obvious to argue. I wanted to scream. I wanted to demand how she could erase me so easily, how she could strip me of everything I had given and call it justice. But my throat closed, and all that came out was silence. My brother leaned back in his chair, his grin widening, soaking in his victory like a predator that had cornered its prey. Outside, my knees buckled. I stumbled into the hallway, gripping the wall to steady myself. My life, my sacrifices, my years of loyalty had been reduced to nothing more than a footnote. Or worse, erased completely. For the first time, I realized I had been playing a game I could never win. What I didn't know then was that someone in that room had recorded the reading of the will. A cousin, phone hidden at his side, captured my pale face, my brother's smug grin, and my mother's chilling explanation. Within hours, the clip found its way online. The internet was merciless. Comments flooded in, strangers debating my worth, dissecting my family like a public spectacle. Some pitied me, others sneered. If the mother left her nothing, maybe she deserved nothing. The betrayal was no longer private, it was entertainment. But the humiliation did something my mother never expected. It ignited me. At first, I stumbled in the dark, replaying her words over and over. "Your brother needs it more." Was I so invisible, so disposable? I sank into despair, nights spent curled on the bathroom floor, muffling sobs so no one would hear. The mirror above me reflected a stranger, hollow-eyed and trembling. I pressed my palms to the cold tile, whispering, "Why am I never enough?" It was there, in that moment of collapse, that something inside me shifted. Desperation gave way to clarity. If they wanted me erased, I would make myself unforgettable. If they thought I would stay silent, I would turn my silence into a weapon. I couldn't fight them with raw emotion. I had already lost too much that way. I had to become someone new. Not the good daughter, not the obedient sister, but the strategist. The first truth I uncovered came quietly, like a snake slithering from the dark. A bank notice arrived in my mail, again, not meant for me, but addressed to me nonetheless. A loan in my name, one I never signed for. The realization struck hard. My mother had been using my identity, weaving her needs into my credit, her desperation into my life. She hadn't just taken my inheritance, she had been stealing from me long before the will was read. Then the second blow. Digging deeper, I discovered paperwork buried in county records. My brother had quietly mortgaged the house, the same house my mother insisted he needed more. He had drained its value before the ink on the will was even dry. The future they denied me was already squandered. I sat on the bathroom floor again, this time not in weakness, but in rage. Tears burned, but they were different, sharp, electric, alive. Light spilled through the small window above the sink, cutting through the shadows. For once, it didn't feel like pity. It felt like a reminder. Even in the darkest rooms, something always shines through. I inhaled deeply, steadying my breath, and let the fury crystallize into focus. They had underestimated me. They believed I was too broken, too soft to fight. But they had made a mistake. I wasn't gone. I wasn't erased. I looked into the mirror, wiped the last of my tears, and whispered to the reflection, "I am no longer a pawn. From now on, I hold the board." And with that, the game truly began. The day I chose to fight back, I didn't begin with shouting matches or angry confrontations. I began with silence, silence that listened, silence that watched, silence that gathered. My family had always thrived on chaos, but chaos leaves trails, and I was going to follow every single one. I started with my finances. Late at night, I sat at my kitchen table, laptop glowing in the dark, combing through records I had once been too tired or too trusting to question. Bank statements, online transactions, fintech logs. The patterns emerged like bruises on pale skin. Transfers I never authorized, payments linked to my accounts. Each discovery was another cut, another confirmation that I had been living in a house of mirrors where nothing was what it seemed. Technology became my quiet ally. I downloaded voice detection software, curious and desperate. My mother's phone had been left in my possession once, years ago, when she bought a newer model. It had been gathering dust in a drawer, forgotten. I powered it on, fingers trembling, and searched through the fragments left behind. Old voicemails, half-deleted recordings, conversations I was never meant to hear. That's when I found it. A grainy recording, her voice sharp, deliberate, speaking to someone I couldn't identify. "Emily doesn't need anything, she'll manage. She always does. The house, the money, it should all go to him." I froze, my stomach lurching. It wasn't a spontaneous decision, not some misguided impulse in her final days. It was premeditated, planned. My erasure had been her intention all along. I copied the file onto a small USB drive, pressing the device into my palm as though it were a weapon. My whisper filled the empty room. "One day this will go public." For the first time, I wasn't powerless. I had proof, but evidence alone wasn't enough. A war like this couldn't be fought alone. I needed allies, and they came from places I least expected. The first was a bank employee, a woman with tired eyes and a voice that carried both caution and sympathy. I had gone to dispute fraudulent charges, expecting indifference. Instead, she leaned closer across her desk and said quietly, "You're not the first. I've seen your brother's name before. Be careful." She flagged certain accounts for me, left breadcrumbs I could follow, without drawing attention. It wasn't open rebellion, but it was solidarity. Then there was Mr. Harlan, the old man who lived 2 doors down from my mother's house. He had watched us for years, a silent witness to the family dynamics we pretended were normal. One evening, as I returned from gathering more documents, he stopped me by the mailbox. "I've seen the way they treat you," he said, voice rough from age but steady with conviction. "You don't deserve it. If you need a witness, I'll stand with you." His words were like a crack of sunlight, breaking through storm clouds. But the ally who shook me most was my aunt, my mother's sister, who had always kept her distance, quiet and cautious. She called me one night, her voice trembling. "They know I've spoken to you. They told me to stay out of it, but I can't anymore." Days later, a flash drive arrived in the mail, hidden in an envelope with no return address. On it was a video of her confession. "I stayed silent too long. Your mother told me years ago she would cut you out. I thought it was just anger talking, but I was wrong. She meant it." The video nearly broke me. I wept as I watched, shoulders shaking, the weight of years pressing down. For once, someone from within had admitted the truth. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. They had been conspiring, and now I had someone willing to risk everything to say it aloud. That night, I met a small group of friends who had stood by me through the chaos. They knew pieces of the story, but now I laid it all out. The will, the forged loans, the recording, the confession. When I finished, the room was heavy with silence. Then one by one, they wrapped their arms around me. It was the kind of embrace that reminded me I wasn't alone anymore. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to exhale, to rest my head on someone's shoulder and feel the comfort of solidarity. Still, even in that moment of reprieve, my mind sharpened. Allies were in place. Evidence was piling up. But to strike effectively, I needed more than proof. I needed a stage big enough to shatter the illusion my family had built. I slid the USB drive into my pocket, my heart steady and deliberate. "The team is ready," I whispered to myself. "Now all we need is the right stage." The invitations had gone out months before, embossed cards carrying the announcement of my brother's wedding. It was to be a grand affair, a showcase of wealth and family pride. My mother boasted endlessly about the guest list, relatives, business partners, community leaders. For them, it was a celebration of legacy. For me, it was the perfect stage. I spent weeks preparing, the USB drive never leaving my sight. Every night, I rehearsed in my head, replaying how I would do it, how I would reveal the truth when the moment arrived. Timing wasn't just important, it was everything. Strike too early, and I'd be dismissed as bitter, jealous. Strike too late, and the damage would be irreversible. I needed the precise moment when the room was most attentive, most vulnerable. The wedding day arrived with all the pomp and glitter they could muster. White flowers lined the aisle, champagne glasses sparkled, laughter filled the air. I sat quietly near the back, a ghost among the living, my hands clenched in my lap. The ceremony unfolded, vows exchanged, promises made under the warm light of chandeliers. My brother smiled like a man who had already won the world. My mother glowed beside him, her victory complete. But victories built on lies have cracks, and cracks always spread. As the reception began, the microphone was passed for toasts. One by one, family members rose, offering rehearsed words of affection and pride. When my name wasn't mentioned, not once, it only fueled my resolve. Finally, when the laughter reached its peak, I rose to my feet. All eyes turned to me. "I want to share something," I said, my voice steady, though inside my heart pounded like war drums. The room quieted, curiosity flickering in their eyes. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small speaker I had hidden. With a single press of a button, my mother's voice filled the hall, sharp and merciless. "Emily doesn't need anything. She'll manage. She always does. The house, the money, it should all go to him." Gasps rippled through the crowd. My brother's face drained of color. My mother stood frozen, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. For a moment, no one moved. Then whispers began to spread, quick and sharp, slicing through the room. And then came the second twist. What no one in that room knew was that I had arranged for a live stream. A friend had set up a phone, discreetly, broadcasting to TikTok. Thousands of viewers were already watching, comments flooding the screen. "This is insane." "Justice for her. Expose them all." The room was no longer private. Every lie, every betrayal, was being consumed by strangers across the world. My family, who had always thrived in secrecy, was dragged into the open, their masks stripped away, in real time. The power shifted instantly. For once, I wasn't the silent one, the erased one. I was the storyteller, and they were caught in their own script. Yet as the murmurs swelled and chaos erupted, I reminded myself this was not the end. This was only the first strike. "Wait," the narrator inside me whispered, even as the crowd demanded answers. "Don't think this is the climax. The storm has only begun." The reaction came swift and vicious. Within days, my family launched their counterattack. They called me a liar, an opportunist desperate for attention. Posts appeared online, smearing my name. They twisted my grief into manipulation, my proof into fabrication. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. They claimed I was mentally unstable. Screenshots circulated, supposedly from private conversations, painting me as erratic, unwell. Old photos surfaced, taken out of context, weaponized against me. "She's sick," they said. "She needs help, not inheritance." For a moment, I faltered. The weight of it pressed down on me until my chest burned. What if people believed them? What if all I had built crumbled under the weight of their lies? I found myself in the bathroom again, staring into the mirror. The same reflection that once begged for answers. My knees weakened, tears streaming down my face, as the thought clawed at me. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was nothing but broken. But then my phone buzzed, a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me open it. The words were simple, almost fragile. "Your story saved me. I thought I was alone. Now I know I'm not." I stared at the screen, the tears still falling, but this time they felt different. Someone out there, a stranger, had found hope in my pain. If I gave up now, I wasn't just surrendering my fight. I was abandoning theirs, too. I straightened slowly, wiping my face. My mother's voice still echoed in my head, but now it was joined by another, softer one. "Don't stop. We need you." I clenched my fists, feeling strength surge again. They could smear me, call me unstable, try to bury me under their lies. But I wasn't fighting just for myself anymore. If I give up, I whispered into the mirror, who will stand? And with that, the war entered its next stage. The courtroom smelled of paper and polished wood, a place where lives were untangled and rewritten under fluorescent lights. I sat at the long table, my hands trembling, knuckles white against the surface. Across from me, my mother and brother sat like statues, their lawyer whispering into their ears. They avoided my gaze, but I felt their presence like daggers at my back. The judge called the session to order, and suddenly, my private war became public record. Documents spread across the table, exhibits of betrayal, the fraudulent loans in my name, the mortgage my brother had concealed, the recording of my mother's voice, all laid bare under the cold scrutiny of law. Their secrets had nowhere left to hide, but they weren't done fighting. My mother, in a final act of defiance, turned the spotlight back on me. She filed a countersuit, accusing me of manipulation, of fabricating evidence, of harassing her in her old age. Her words dripped with poison, spoken with the same maternal authority she had always wielded. "She is not well," she told the court. "She's unstable. She needs help, not judgment." For a moment, I froze. The air felt thin, my breath shallow. Hadn't I heard these words before? Whispered in family arguments, screamed in silence. But this time was different. This time, I had more than memories. I had proof. My lawyer stood calmly, presenting the evidence piece by piece. Certified bank statements, forensic analysis of digital transactions, expert testimony from a doctor confirming I had no history of mental illness. Every card my mother tried to play crumbled beneath the weight of hard truth. The judge's expression shifted, sympathy fading from my mother's story, replaced by measured disapproval. By the time the gavel struck, her countersuit had collapsed entirely. My mother, the woman who raised me with lullabies and lies, sat defeated, her composure cracked. My brother stared at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Justice had not only spoken, it had shouted. In that moment, I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt my body trembling, my chest heaving with quiet sobs I refused to release. Sitting there, in the silence after the verdict, I placed a hand against my thigh, trying to steady the shaking. For the first time, I allowed myself to breathe. Not in anger, not in fear, but in release. The battle wasn't over, but for a fleeting moment, I tasted the air of freedom. Yet even as relief washed over me, I knew victory wasn't about reclaimed money or property. Those things mattered, yes, but they were never the true wound. What I craved was something deeper, recognition, validation that I had not been invisible, that my suffering had not been in vain. That recognition came in a way I never expected. After the trial, a group of strangers approached me outside the courthouse. At first, I didn't understand. Then one of them, a middle-aged woman with weary eyes, stepped forward. "I knew your mother," she said softly. "She borrowed money from me years ago, lied about paying it back. I never told anyone. I was too ashamed." Another voice chimed in. "She did it to me too. I thought I was alone." More faces, more stories, people I had never met, but who carried scars remarkably like mine. Their pain echoed my own, hidden behind closed doors until someone dared to expose it. And somehow that someone was me. It hit me then. My fight was never just about inheritance. It was about pulling back the curtain, forcing light into the shadows my mother had cultivated for years. I wasn't just reclaiming what was mine. I was giving voice to those she had silenced. The satisfaction I felt wasn't the sharp thrill of revenge, but something steadier, warmer, healing empowerment. Revenge had been the spark, but justice, that was the flame. And from its fire, something stronger was being forged. As I walked away from the courthouse, the city buzzing around me, I felt lighter, not because I had won, but because I had broken free of the cage built around me since childhood. I whispered to myself, letting the words settle in the air. I have won, but more importantly, I am free. When the trial ended and the dust settled, I did something I had never dared to do before. I cut the cord. I blocked my mother's number. I left the family group chats. I stopped answering the late-night calls that once dictated my life. At first, the silence was deafening. For years, I had been conditioned to respond, to serve, to give. Now the absence of their voices felt both terrifying and liberating. I moved into a small apartment across town. It wasn't grand or lavish, but it was mine. The first morning I woke there, sunlight spilled through the thin curtains, painting the walls gold. I padded into the kitchen, barefoot, and put the kettle on. As the water hissed and bubbled, I realized how strange it felt to make tea without rushing, without dread of an incoming demand. I sat by the window, with my mug in hand, steam curling into the morning light, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt at peace. That moment became my anchor, my reminder that freedom is not always loud or triumphant. Sometimes it is quiet, a warm cup between your hands, the sun on your face, the knowledge that no one can take this from you. Still, even as I breathed in that peace, a thought flickered. This is not the end. This is only the beginning. I began to build boundaries like walls, not to keep love out, but to protect what I had nearly lost, myself. I refused to let my mother's guilt seep back into my veins. When relatives tried to guilt me into reconciliation, I answered with firm but calm silence. My past would no longer dictate my future. In that space of protection, I began to grow. What had once been shame became a story, and stories are powerful. I started small, sharing my experiences anonymously online. To my surprise, people listened. Messages poured in, strangers who had lived my life in different houses with different names, but the same wounds. They told me my words gave them courage. That realization lit something inside me. Soon I stood on a stage, trembling but steady, speaking not as the erased daughter, but as the survivor who refused to stay silent. I talked about betrayal, manipulation, and the cost of blind loyalty. I spoke about the quiet strength of reclaiming your life. Each time I looked into the crowd, I saw faces softening, tears shining, people who recognized themselves in my story. I wrote. Pages turned into chapters, chapters into a book. Not a tale of bitterness, but a guide for others to see the signs, to set boundaries, to choose themselves. And in giving voice to others, I found mine. Somewhere along the way, love returned to me. Not the twisted, conditional kind I had grown up with, but something genuine. I met a man who didn't ask me to sacrifice pieces of myself to prove my worth. He listened. He respected the walls I had built, not as obstacles, but as evidence of the battles I had fought. With him, I learned that intimacy doesn't have to be suffocating, that love can coexist with freedom. It was not a fairy tale. It was something better, real, grounded, earned. And as the seasons turned, I found myself smiling not out of obligation, but because happiness had finally stopped feeling like a borrowed gift. Looking back, I understood the full arc of my story. It had never been just about inheritance, or revenge, or even justice. It was about liberation, about becoming whole after being broken, about thriving where I had once only survived. On a quiet evening years later, I stood by the window of my apartment, now filled with books, plants, and laughter. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with hues of fire and promise. I thought of the girl who once cried into her dog's fur, who believed love meant erasure. I thought of the woman in the courthouse, trembling but unbroken, and I thought of the self I had become, standing tall, not because I was untouched by pain, but because I had learned to rise from it. I set down my tea, drew in a breath, and smiled. I didn't just survive, I whispered to the fading light. I thrived.